Hi everybody, Russ here, and today is the long-awaited video about my portable shelter choices that I use when I'm out backpacking. Now, while I was putting together the script for this video, I realized that I never really described very much the type of hiking I do. When I say backpacking, this isn't a formal definition or anything, but when I say backpacking, I'm talking about the type of hiking where you have to be totally self-contained. Everything you need or could possibly use, you have to carry with you because you're going from campsite to campsite with 10, 20, I've even done 24 miles in a day in between campsites. Now, this is as opposed to or in contrast to other types of camping, such as base camping. Base camping is just my term for when you set up a campsite that's going to be more or less permanent for the duration of your trip, and you're going to go out and do hikes from there. This might be common for people who are trying to climb all the 4,000 footers in a particular area. That's a goal a lot of people have. They're going to climb all 4,000 footers in New England, for example. And then you return each day to the base camp, and that's a whole different style of hiking. Weight is less of a concern. If we do car camping, which is kind of base camping, car camping, very similar, you can have a lot of extra equipment, and the tent that you have for it does not have to meet the stringent requirements of what you might need for backpacking. And then finally, there's just plain day hiking where you may just leave your house, drive to a trailhead, hike to another trailhead where you've parked another car, or do some kind of loop that returns you to your car. So I'm talking about backpacking, talking about backpacking, which is that self-contained style of hiking. Now, I generally use a tent. I use a Z-Pax Duplex, and that's the model name, the Z-Pax Duplex tent when I'm backpacking. Duplex indicates that it's a two-person tent, but there's a fair warning here. When we're talking about the capacity of a tent, it's usually given in persons. Your equipment really counts as a person. So if you have a triplex tent, which is their model for 3 people, it's really kind of 2 people plus equipment. The 2-person tent gives each person 22.5 inches of sleeping width. The triplex tent actually gives each person only 20 inches of sleeping width if you really put 2 or 3 people in there. When you do put 2 people in a duplex, and I have done this with Craig, it's a little cramped. We do get some equipment into the tent, but it's a little tight, and we have to use the vestibules. And when we go outside and look at the tent, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now, this tent is advertised as a 19-ounce tent, yet my version of it is 28 ounces. And you can say, well, that's a very large discrepancy. Partly, there is a little bit of disingenuousness going on with Z-Packs here. They don't count the weight of the stakes. The stakes are sold separately. You can use your own stakes, whatever. But they're necessary to set up the tent. So to me, it's part of the tent weight. So in my case, that's another 3.5 ounces right there. So really, this tent ought to be advertised as at least a 22.5 ounce tent, but it's advertised as a 19-ounce tent. Now, I also got a heavier material model, which is no longer available, actually. It's a camouflage material. I just wanted a little bit of the extra security from that material. And that extra material adds another 4 ounces or something of that sort. I also use a different stuff sack. And the different stuff sack is just because the capacity is the same, but the shape is different than the one that comes with it. It's one that Darlene found for me at Walmart. She's really good at finding nice camping equipment for me at cheap places, and quite often I end up using it. It becomes an integral part of my backpacking. And that's so that I can carry the tent on the outside of my backpack. Just the shape that you get from the stuff sack that comes with the tent really doesn't match that. So now, let's go outside and take a look at the tent where I've set it. Okay, so I've set up the tent in my backyard. And by the way, if you want a real professional description of the tent, go to the Z-Packs website. If you are actually considering buying this, you can actually get the full information on it, and they give you all the details. I've got my sleeping pad in there just so you can see kind of the size of it. It does pitch at 4 feet high
which gives you a bit of headroom for sitting up, and it is allegedly 7.5 feet long. I think that's a bit of a stretch, um, and it is 45 inches wide. It's got these interior mesh pockets you can see down there. I think the latest version, the mesh pockets are on the side near the screens. Um, it is a very expensive tent, though. It's now sells for about $650. The base model duplex. Um, the base model was $595, I believe, at the time that I bought this one. So, uh, but it is a nice tent. It's a trekking pole tent. I don't include the weight of the trekking poles in the weight of the tent because trekking poles are something I'm bringing with me anyway. It's always nice to get dual use out of any equipment. That's a kind of a weight savings mechanism. But of course, if you're using your trekking pole for your tent structure, it makes it really unsuitable for that kind of base camping or car camping if you want to use trekking poles when you actually hike. It has two screen doors. You can see the screen door through on the other side, which is really great when you do have two people in it because you don't have to climb over each other to get out. Um, there are two vestibules. Over here I have one of the tent flaps. There's 4 tent flaps. I have one of them open. Over here you can see what it's like when the vestibule is closed. It provides some protection against the elements for maybe some of your equipment. Your equipment, like maybe you don't care if it gets a little damp, but you know, you don't want to get it rained on completely. So that's that provides some extra equipment space. It is made out of, it's kind of hard to see, I'll bring it up close, what's called a Dyneema. It used to be called Cuban fiber. Apparently, I read somewhere that the company that manufactures it didn't think Cuban fiber conveyed what it does, so they renamed it Dyneema, which, you know, I got to put the WTF on that because I don't see how that conveys any more information, but you know, that's marketing. The normal Dyneema composite material is actually very see-through. I happen to get the heavier material in the camouflage, which is no longer available. I've actually had people, or a person, offer to buy my tent from me right out on the trail. So if you value your privacy, I would say you have to get a darker color and pitch away from everybody else and hope for the best. So it is kind of very see-through. It is not freestanding. It does require 8 stakes. I have learned how to pitch this on a tent platform to the point now where I prefer tent platforms because typically it's a cleaner situation. I do now, on the advice of another hiker, I bring little eye hooks with me in case I am on a tent platform in which they don't have the right kind of doodads or doohickeys or whatever to hook things to. So those I could actually put into the wood, doing minimal damage, hopefully, and then take them with me when I leave. So the fact that it's a trekking pole tent and the fact that it's not freestanding, they are limiting options. I would have a hard time pitching this tent in the Grand Canyon. The ground is just so hard. It's hard to get stakes into the ground at most of the campsites there. So this is how it worked for me. It does have to be pitched properly. I was pitching it too low for a while, and a little bit of water was splashing in through the mesh on the ends, getting my equipment a little damp. The water would hit the mesh screens and kind of turn into a mist. Once I learned that I was pitching it too low, I started pitching it higher, and that took care of that. So it has held up in heavy rains. I got hit with some very heavy rains in Virginia, and the tent did hold up against that. Like I said, it can be pitched on a platform with a little bit of ingenuity, and I carry it outside my pack. In my next video, I'll actually talk about my pack, and I'll show you how that works. It is really good for the solo camping. It's a good compromise between size and weight, and you know, the times that Craig goes with me and we go hiking together, we put up with a little bit of the cramped space. It's not as bad as other tents we've had, so it actually can work out quite well. So I have managed to use it with 2 people. So that's the tent setup. Again, go to Z-Packs if you're going to spend this much money on a tent. If you happen to want to match my tent, I would say carefully consider, you know, everything they talk about it. Again, my sleeping pad is in there just to show you, you know, that yes, a full-size human being can actually be in this thing. Your head is closer to the top on the sleeping ends and by your feet. Sometimes I've seen some people actually, one guy, the professor, who I met in Tennessee, he had the same kind of tent, and he actually pitched, you know, he had a stick under here, had this guy line come out a little higher, gave him a little bit more headroom. So that can be done too. So that's the Z-Packs duplex tent that I use.
Okay, there's one other type of shelter that I actually do own one of, and that's a hammock. And a lot of backpackers love it, almost to the point that tenters and hammockers are like the Red Sox and the Yankees, or you know, the Patriots and the Jets, where of course the tenters would be the Patriots in that case. But hikers really do love it, and I do own one, and we'll go outside again, and I've got it hung out there, and we'll take a look at it. There are many advantages. I have to admit, the hammock was much more comfortable for sleeping in. Maybe not much more, but it was more comfortable for sleeping in. I can use a smaller insulating pad, which actually kind of offsets the extra weight of the hammock. When we get to it, we'll see that my hammock actually weighs more than my tent. You don't need to find flat ground. I didn't mention that with the tent, but finding a place to pitch the tent can sometimes be difficult, and you really don't care about the ground when you've got a hammock. It is comparable in weight to the tent. Like I said, it is a little bit heavier. That's offset partly by using a smaller insulating pad, which I will show you when we go look at the hammock, so that they're close enough in weight. The hammock totality, you know, adds you know, a quarter pound or something to your pack, at least in my case with the equipment that I have. Some of the disadvantages: suitable trees. You would think that trees would be easy to find. They grow everywhere. Well, they're quite often hard to find because, you know, they have to be within a certain range of width. They have to be a certain distance apart from each other. I do happen to have the perfect ones in some town property off the back of my you know, my backyard. And if you're above tree line, just forget it. You're not going to be able to go camping above a tree line. The space for equipment is very limited. You do actually have some, you know, pockets and things like that, and I used to hang my hat inside where I could put like electronics and small things that I needed. But there's really no place to put the bulk of your equipment, so you do have to make accommodations for your equipment, whether that's hanging it like the same way you would a bear bag, except, you know, in something waterproof. That's one way to deal with that. My friend Mike, who's an avid hammocker, has actually created a setup in which his backpack has a little mini hammock underneath his that you know, that is where he can store his things. If you're using a hammock, you're usually not well equipped to use a shelter. You know, when I was out on the my long section hike from Delaware Water Gap down in Pennsylvania down to Roanoke, Virginia, I think I added it up. I did sleep in my tent more often than I slept in shelters, but not by a lot. I think it was something like, you know, 17 nights in the tent, 16 nights in shelters. The rest of the time was in hostels and stuff like that. So if you're hammocking, it's actually very difficult to use a shelter because you typically don't have the sleeping pad. And you're going to be sleeping on a hard wooden floor without much except maybe that insulated pad that you know, because you don't need that in a hammock, so you typically wouldn't carry it with you without adding weight to your pack. And it's also not easy to get out of if you really want to get out of your sleeping bag. Now, I want to keep my sleeping bag clean, so unless I happen to pitch hang the hammock over a tent platform, which you can do, you know, out of politeness to the hikers who do use tents. It's usually if you're at a campsite where there's not a lot of people. But getting out of the sleeping bag while inside the hammock, and then getting out of the hammock in the middle of the night, which you can imagine why the reason is that you might want to get out in the middle of the night. that can be very difficult. So now let's go take a look at my hammock.
Okay, I've set up my hammock in the backyard. I've pitched it a little lower under the fly simply so that for filming purposes it would be easier to see what's going on. It is like a two-wall or double-wall tent suspended in the air. I didn't mention single wall versus double wall when I was speaking about tents. My tent is a single wall. The complaint that a lot of hikers have is that you get condensation inside sometimes in the morning. I've never had that problem, but I understand it can be a problem. It wouldn't be a problem here. So you see that there's mosquito netting here to keep the bugs out, so it is not open to, you know, the elements. There is a self-closing exit door here, which you can kind of see. Put my fingers through it. When your weight is on that, that closes automatically and velcros in place. The large overhead fly, you know, when I would pull it down a little lower, does protect you from the elements. And this is a relatively thin fabric and it is not insulated. The first time I actually used this tent, this hammock, the very first time was at around 2,900 feet above sea level in Maine in August. And temperature got pretty low and the wind was blowing over me and I nearly froze until I remembered I had this insulating pad as part of what I was using as my backpack. You can see it there through the screen. It provides a rigid, adds some rigidity to my older backpack. And you unfold it, you know, it folds in half and then quarters. And I put that under me and it was like having a heating pad. All of a sudden it got nice and warm in here. So I slept really comfortably in this. So for people who prefer hammocking, you know, it is legitimate. You notice there's really no place for me to put equipment. It does have, you know, a mesh pocket there inside, a couple hooks. I usually would take my wide brim hat and hook it into that, and then I could use the wide brim hat as an extra pocket. I don't need a pillow because of the slope of the thing. It is very comfortable, especially if you're a back sleeper. I'm kind of a side sleeper and it was pretty good for that. So that's the hammock. I don't use it much anymore, but it is an option, and most hammockers I've met really love it. The idea. This is the ASIM motto that I mentioned previously. It just means it's a little asymmetrical. I don't know why they came up with that design for this particular hammock. I bought this from a guy at work at Raytheon real cheap because he was afraid it wasn't going to be good for his back. It actually would have been very good for his back, I think. So there you have it.